light blinds him. He's blinded by the light. And the risen Christ visits him, and he says, "Why are you persecuting me?" Paul receives his sight, and then he sets off to go and spread the word. He had it all wrong. Jesus is the truth. And he gets arrested. He gets arrested. There's multiple times he gets arrested, actually, but this time he speaks up in front of the council, says that Jesus is alive. He appeals to Caesar. So they're like, we got to get this guy to Rome. He meets with King Agrippa. He gives him his spiel. King Agrippa nearly becomes a Christian just based off of Paul's testimony. And yet, not the case. They still need to send him off to Caesar. So here we are, guys. Paul is on his way to Rome. Let's wrap the book of Acts. We'll get into it right now. It is Acts chapter 27, verse 1. And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in a ship of Adramyttium, which was about to sail, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. Now the next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly, and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. And putting out to sea from there, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus, because the winds were against us. And when we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. There, the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus. And as the wind did not allow us to go further, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salmone. Coasting along it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lasea. We hopped on a ship on our way to Italy. We made a few different stops along the way. At one point, we had to hop on a different boat because the wind was against us. He's just kind of giving us a recap of their trip. Now it says, and they're on their way to Rome, remember. So it says, since much time had passed, and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul had said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. So Paul, he wants to warn them. He says, "Hey guys, I'm getting this vibe that this voyage is not going to go well. There's going to be some injury and a lot of loss, and I'm telling you, I think a lot of us might die." Of course, the centurion doesn't even listen to Paul, this prisoner. Instead, he pays more attention to the pilot and the owner of the ship, and they keep trying to make their way despite that. So, thank you for all the likes, guys. James, thank you for sharing on Facebook. It's awesome. Awesome stuff, guys. So, Paul has warned, and here we go, right? It says, now, when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed another anchor and sailed along Crete, close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind, called the northeaster, struck down from the land. And when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. Since we were violently storm tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. So, this is Luke recounting what had happened on this ship, guys. Everything. The weather is against them. There's no night or day. They can't tell. They can't see the sun during the day. They can't see the stars at night. And in a panic, they're throwing things overboard. They're throwing all the jettison, they call it. You can imagine all their cargo, or sorry, they're jettisoning the cargo. They're throwing the cargo overboard. Um, in attempt to get the ship floating on the water again and maybe out to sea. But it sounds like they were running aground. So just craziness going on here. And keep in mind, Paul had warned them. He thought this was going to get bad. So here's what it says. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, Men, you should have listened to me and not set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. An angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island. So Paul receives this message right from an angel of God. No one's going to die. Paul's got to see Caesar. And he relays it to him. He says, Listen, you should have listened to me back there, but I'm telling you now, I was visited by an angel of God. Listen to me. Listen to me. And he says, Take heart. I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island. So, when the 14th night had come, as we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors suspected that they were nearing land. So they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. A little farther on, they took a sounding again and found 15 fathoms. And fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for the day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship and had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. Put away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it go. You see what's happening here? They're trying to go against what Paul laid out. They're trying to throw down the anchors and stop the ship. And Paul is saying, no, no, no. You got to cut away the ropes. You have to stay in the ship or you're going to die. So they cut away the ropes. Now all of a sudden they're listening to Paul. As day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take some food, saying, Today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore, I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength, for not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you. And when he had said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. Then they all were encouraged and ate some food themselves. We were all in all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. So, wow, do you see this, guys? They're staying on the ship. And Paul says, listen, you guys got to stay on if you want to be saved. 276 people on this ship on their way to Italy. That is not a small amount of people. And so, uh, Paul, and again, Paul mimics Jesus here. What does he do? He takes the bread, he gives thanks, he breaks it. And all these men eat. It says they had eaten enough. Then they lightened the ship and they threw out the wheat into the sea. So, I'm thinking a miracle took place here. The same way Jesus broke the bread and fed the 5,000. Here's Paul breaking bread and feeding 276. They hadn't eaten for 14 days. Can you imagine that, guys? Going 14 days with no food on a ship, thinking you're going to die. Their suspense is up, their anxiety is up. Paul's trying to calm them down. Hey, guys, I think it'll be good for everybody to eat. It's going to strengthen you. Check this out. Now, when the day had come, and they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach, on which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors, and they left them in the sea, at the same time loosening the ropes that tied the rudders. Then, hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran a vessel aground. The bow stuck and remained immovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. But the centurion kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and to make for the land, and the rest on planks or on pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to the land. That wraps Acts chapter. Paul on his way to Italy. Think about the turmoil he's facing right here. He's telling them, you have to stay on. You have to stay on this ship if you want to be saved. And finally, they make it to land. But what happens? The ship hits the reef. It's getting busted up. The soldiers, they think we have to kill these prisoners. Otherwise, when they get to the land, they're going to run free. But the centurion wishes to save Paul, and so he keeps them from carrying out their plan. He gets everybody together. He says, if you can swim, swim to the land, but if not, grab a piece of the plank or a piece of the ship and float yourself off to the land. All 276 of them made it safely to the land. That's where we're at, guys. So let's get into it, guys. The final chapter of the book of Acts. We're wrapping it up right here. There was a shipwreck. They've made it to the island. Here it is, guys. Acts 28, the final chapter of the Acts of the Apostles. Here we go. Paul on Malta. After we were brought safely through, we then learned that the island was called Malta. The native people showed us unusual kindness, for they kindled a fire and welcomed us all, because it had begun to rain and was cold. Now, when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and put them on the fire, a viper came out because of the heat and fastened on his hand. When the native people saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, no doubt this man is a murderer. Though he has escaped from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live. So can you see the superstition of these native people? Paul is building a fire for everybody, and a snake jumps out and bites his hand. And all the native people say, well, this guy's a murderer, right? He's one of those criminals from the ship. And justice would not let them, has not allowed him to live. Now he's going to die, that he got bit by this snake. All right. It says, Paul, however, shook off the creature into the fire and suffered no harm. They were waiting for him to swell up or suddenly fall down dead. But when they had waited a long time and saw that no misfortune had come to him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god. Now, in the neighborhood of that place were lands belonging to the chief men of the island, a chief man named Publius, who received us and entertained us hospitably for 3 days. It happened that the father of Publius lay sick with fever and dysentery, and Paul visited him and prayed, and putting his hands on him, healed him. And when this had taken place, the rest of the people on the island who had diseases also came and were cured. They also honored us greatly, and when we were about to sail, they put on board whatever we needed. So think about this, guys. They land on this deserted island. There's a native people there, and they're kind to Paul. They're nice to Paul. They're making a fire because it's cold and it's rainy. Paul is putting some sticks on the fire. A snake jumps out and bites him on the hand. These natives know that must be a poisonous snake. That must be a deadly snake. They think justice is finally, having its way with Paul, and Paul's going to die. But Paul shakes off the creature into the fire, and he suffers no harm. And so these people stand by and they're waiting. Is he going to die? Is he going to swell up? What's going on here? Um, and it says, and when they had waited a long time and saw that nothing bad had happened to him, they changed their mind and said that he was a god. BG Gaming, thank you very much. Um, so you could just imagine these native people just in disbelief of what has occurred here. Um, Paul shaking off this deadly snake. They think he's a god all of a sudden. And then what happens is they start treating him kindly, right? They take him to the chief of the island, Publius, whose dad is sick and has dysentery. Paul prays over him and he gets healed, miraculously healed. And the word spreads. And now all the people from the island are making their way to Paul to get prayed. And it says, he put his hands on them and he healed them. They had many diseases and were cured. So, how amazing is this, guys? How amazing is this? Cody, yes, I mentioned about the superstitious. Hold on to that thought while we get through this, okay? So, that's where we're at, guys. They had to set sail, and these natives gave them everything they needed. Now, after 3 months, we set sail in a ship that had wintered in the island, a ship of Alexandria, with the twin gods as a figurehead. Putting in at Syracuse, we stayed there for 3 days, and from there we made a circuit and arrived at Rhegium. And after one day, a south wind sprang up, and on the second day we came to Puteoli. There we found brothers, and were invited to stay with them for 7 days. And so we came to Rome. Came as far as the Forum of Appius and the Three Taverns to meet us. On seeing them, Paul thanked God and took courage. And when we came into Rome, Paul was allowed to stay by himself with the soldier who guarded him. So they finally make it to Rome, guys. 3 months later, they're sailing. They're making their way from city to city or coast to coast, whatever it may be, riding the circuit. And they finally end up in Rome. And the brothers there in the faith greet Paul. It strengthens him. He's feeling good. He's got to see Caesar, where he can stay by himself. And there's a soldier there that guards him. All right, this is coming up on the end of Acts, guys. Ian, thank you very much. Julia, appreciate you guys. So after 3 days, he called together the local leaders of the Jews. And when they had gathered, he said to them, brothers, though I had done nothing against our people or the customs of our fathers, yet I was delivered as a prisoner from Jerusalem into the hands of the Romans. When they had examined me, they wished to set me at liberty, because there was no reason for the death penalty in my case. But because the Jews objected, I was compelled to appeal to Caesar, though I had no charge to bring against my nation. Now, for this reason, therefore, I have asked to see you and speak with you, since it is because of the hope of Israel that I am wearing this chain. And they said to him, We have received no letters from Judea about you, and none of the brothers coming here has reported or spoken any evil about you. But we desire to hear from you what your views are. For with regard to this sect, we know that everywhere it is spoken against. Now, when they had appointed a day for him, they came to him at his lodging in great numbers. From morning until evening, he expounded to them, testifying to the kingdom of God and trying to convince them about Jesus, both from the law of Moses and from the prophets. And some were convinced by what he said, but others disbelieved. And disagreeing among themselves, they departed after Paul had made one statement, quote, the saying to your fathers through Isaiah the prophet, Go to this people and say, You will indeed hear, but never understand. You will indeed see, but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and with their ears they can barely hear, and their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and turn, and I would heal them. Therefore, let it be known to you that this salvation of God has been sent to the Gentiles. They will listen. He lived there 2 whole years at his own expense and welcomed all who came to him, proclaiming the kingdom of God and teaching about the Lord Jesus Christ with all boldness and without hindrance. That wraps Acts chapter 28. That's the entire book of Acts, guys.